Darkness burned at the edge of every star inside the Grand Council chamber, a cold, patient hunger eating through centuries of maps and treaties. The holotable spat numbers like graves. 47 civilizations waited, and every single one of them felt the same impossible weight. I remember the silence, the way it tasted like static. Then a voice, small and exhausted, said the thing no simulation had prepared us for. We are out of time. This is Sci-Fi HFY Narrative. If you love stories where stubborn human imagination reshapes fate, subscribe now. Join this channel and stand with people who improvise, endure, and turn the impossible into legend. Hit subscribe. Be part of the chorus that refuses to surrender, where humanity echoes across the stars. By the time the signal reached our council, the star map was already a ruin. I am Trazyn of the Quellian envoy, not exalted, not brave, merely the translator who survived to tell this. Around the circular chamber, 47 voices argued over decimals and ethics, while the true problem listened and grew. The enemy arrived like a calculus of appetite, constructs that ate matter and turned it into more of themselves. Some called them hollows, others said devourers. Names mattered less than what they did. Cities and orbital farms vanished. Biospheres were stripped of frames and memory. Our fleets struck and failed. Tactics that worked on beasts or machines could not unmake a hunger that consumed and remade. The council ran out of strategies the way a town runs out of roofs in a storm. Some advised quarantine. Others wanted engineered viruses. One delegation proposed folding entire systems into pocket shelters. None offered a sure path. Then, Elder Norix, who rarely raised her voice, said the thing that bent the room's air. There is one species left at the edge, dangerous. Yes, and kept apart for a reason. They are human. Outrage crashed against cold logic. Humans had been quarantined for centuries because their eyes had been sharp, unpredictable, and marked by violence. Still, survival has a way of lowering polite fences. I was assigned because my dossier contained the freshest human cultural logs, and because no higher diplomat wanted the risk. We left in a trim diplomatic vessel bound for the human system. Passing the warning beacons our elders had set, Ambassador Kelso watched their glow and said quietly, "We built a gate to warn ourselves. Now we go to the gate with a request." There was no ceremony left, only urgency. It felt like borrowed time. Crossing the council's warning beacons felt like stepping into a different atmosphere, one charged with human noise and resolve. The human colonies had not been idle during quarantine. They had turned observation into education and surveillance into practice. We contacted them at Mars, not in a capital city, but at a ring of settlements where industry and neighborhoods braided together. Director Mara Quinn met our delegation in a hall that felt practical and lived in, a place built for doing, not for speeches. She listened without ornament, then nodded once and laid out their philosophy plainly. We do not pretend to be tidy. We are fast and stubborn. With her stood Admiral Elena Reyes, General Tio Ibu, Dr. Laila Asher, and Ambassador Conor Omali, a mixed team of veterans, scientists, and civilians. The human response was not an armada in textbook formation. It resembled a moving workshop, converted freighters, refitted miners, and civilian craft all readied for combat. Where our fleets prized uniformity, humans prized redundancy. Multiple imperfect copies of tools so that failure never meant total loss. That redundancy showed in how they prepared to fight the hollows, fabricators that could be reprogrammed on the fly. Salvage crews turned into ordnance teams, and every captain who volunteered brought a dozen improvisations in their hold. Admiral Reyes explained their central idea in blunt terms. We will not win by matching their strength. We will win by changing what strength means. She called their plan adaptive attrition, disrupt the hollows' assumptions, deny them predictable resources, and repurpose their biomass against them. Humans also brought something the council had not measured well: imagination, an ability to make lateral leaps under pressure. Dr. Asher showed us schematics for resonance sequences meant to twist the hollows, replication protocols, while engineers displayed nets and modular forges to harvest enemy matter. There was also a stubborn cultural choice: to keep civilians aboard many vessels, to bring bakers and teachers and artists into the fleet rather than evacuate them. If we are to face extinction, General Ibu said, we will do so with our stories intact. The human ships left Mars in a distracted column that hid precise vectors and revealed only intent. They would arrive where they were least expected. Watching them prepare, I felt the council officers shift uneasily. Our models prefer predictable economies of force, but the human method relied on unpredictable human wills. In quiet moments, I saw small human rituals that mattered more than any tactical diagram. A mechanic slipping a child's drawing into a toolbox. A captain teaching a recruit an old cadence to ease fear. Within 24 hours they had assembled a force of ships that blurred traditional categories. Scientific barges armed with conversion kits, cargo holds refitted to launch swarms of improvised missiles, and civilian tugs that formed defensive lattice. They used distributed logistics like folk art. Captains collected raw materials from nearby belts and miners, redirected or flows. Admiral Reyes smiled when I asked how they coordinated such ragged fleets. We argue in flight, we decide and we fly. It's messy, but it works. Dr. Asher's team had also discovered brief, safe windows to tweak FTL signatures for short hops, allowing surprise insertions near the hollow's paths. I had expected trembling fear. Instead, I found a species that normalized danger into routine, terrified and still methodical. The council protested the risk of civilians in harm's way. The answer the hulls offered was plain. We fight to keep lives worth living. We departed Mars as an odd promise, flawed, hopeful, and determined, an experiment in audacity wrapped in human humor and song. The meeting at Centauri Hub had a manic quality to it. Holograms and coffee cups, grief and grim humor in equal measure. Galactic commanders kept to their traditional perimeters, a ring of warships in the expected geometry. The humans arrived like a storm that folded and reformed, their vessels not in a line but in a humming scatter. Little lights that seemed to have no pattern until you learned to listen to their noise. Admiral Reyes' voice over the comms was calm, almost casual. Scatter, draw, surprised them into making assumptions about us. At first, the hollows treated the human fleet like any small prey. Pick off the edges. Consume, absorb the mass. Their swarm logic was elegant and brutal. A distributed algorithm of hunger. The humans did not engage in straightforward attrition. They played a longer game. For hours, their ships acted like irritants and chaff, baiting the harvester swarms into pursuit, then curling away in sudden angles. During those maneuvers, hundreds of small human rigs deployed microfabrication nodes and magnetic nets, devices built from minor rigs and the guts of cargo drives. These nets snapped into space like spider silk and caught dozens of the smaller harvested drones, which the humans then fed into a chain of modular forges. What horrified the council liaisons was simple. They watched a fleet of miners and cargo ships become an industry of war. The forges tore the captured hollows matter down to raw frameworks and then rebuilt it as ordnance. Missiles and penetrators came out of the same machines that once carved concrete blocks. There was a grim elegance to it. The enemy's own substance turned into the tools of its undoing. The human engineers explained it with a grin. If something is trying to eat us, we will teach it to be a meal. But the Hollow's largest world craft were different. They were not simply swarms but moving bastions of adapted shielding and internal cohesion. Weapons took glancing hits and shrugged pulses. Our tactical models chafed at the problem. The humans, however, had another idea, one that sounded more like biology than ballistics. Dr. Laila Asher's team, working from the backs of refitted research barges, had developed resonance sequencers, devices that could rewrite informational coils in the Hollow's molecular arrays. They studied the Hollows not as metal but as a pattern of replication and communication. They speak in frequencies and folded replication steps. Dr. Asher told us, we can whisper back. To deliver the whisper required courage and a kind of improvised finesse. Small science craft, not warships, but research vessels and neutrino gliders, accelerated toward the world craft and attached themselves under the cover of the bigger ship's distraction. From those holes, the sequencers poured a tidy virus of information, tiny, precise edits that did not destroy the organisms, but contradicted their basic behaviors. The Hollows, which had always behaved with hungry consistency, began to feel what could only be described as cognitive noise. Sections of their networks hesitated. Harvesters stalled mid-bite, as if a memory had been misplaced. The world craft, vast and ancient as cathedral rocks, began to twitch with mismatch. In one theater of the fight, the effect was explosive and almost biblical. A larger world craft began to feed on its own smaller tendrils after receiving the sequencer's edits. The sight was terrible and revelatory. The Hollows, distributed mind had few defenses against the idea of itself being other. As the giant consumed a section of its own fleet, its attack patterns collapsed into a chaos that the human fleet used like a wedge. There were losses. Brave captains died tethered to struts, minds that failed to separate, and fabricators that jammed under the strain. But the human way of counting victory was not neat. They tallied lives saved, systems preserved, and futures kept open. Commander Felix Navaro, a human tactical officer with a habit of laughing while under fire, piloted a small science ship into the shadows of the enemy's throat and seeded a sequencer array at the ancient junction points of the Hollow's communication spine. It was a hair's-breadth operation. The ship was ripped and the crew swelled into legend. But when it was done, a cascade of failure rolled through the enemy lines. Once the systemic coherence of the Hollows was broken, the modular forges and repurposed salvage ships did what they did best. They chewed, recycled, and spat missiles built from Hollow's matter back at the enemy. The missiles bypassed many of the Hollow's recognition filters and tore into holes with a vengeance born of being built from the enemy itself. In the end, 3 massive world craft were either destroyed or captured, their cores bundled away for study. The last of the swarms scattered and fled, less organized, less terrible than before. Up close, the Hollows were pattern more than machine, latticed filaments and trial bioharvesters that moved with single-minded purpose. Resonance sequencers whispered edge into that pattern, small contradictions that did not destroy but confused. When a harvester paused for the first time, the pause spread like a rumor. Human compassion threaded through the violence in practical forms. Medics risked field runs to pull wrecked pilots from drifting debris, and mechanics kept mementos in lockers to steady hands. These small acts preserved crew cohesion and reduced the friction of fear. Not all choices were morally neat. Civilians worked salvage lines, teachers ran drones, miners became ordnance techs. The council fretted over blurred roles, but the humans answered that preserving life required keeping life in the loop. The pivot came when Navaro's small craft seeded sequencer arrays into a world-craft's nodes. The edits propagated and produced mismatch. Larger Hollows began misreading signals and, absurdly, consumed parts of their own swarm. Predator turned inward. Formations disintegrated, and the human fleet pressed the advantage. With coherence gone, human forges recycled captured matter into munitions that bypassed Hollow's defenses. 3 world craft were neutralized or captured. The remaining swarms fragmented and fled. The battle lasted 6 hours. There were losses and stories that would become legend, but the strategic change was stark. The humans refused a calculation that led to extinction and, in doing so, altered the war's equation. After the smoke cleared and the forges cooled, I watched crews sing to each other while they repaired hulls. The song was not about triumph, but about being there for the next morning. The council observers were stunned. Some wept. For the first time in recorded deliberations, fear and gratitude shared a table, and hope. After Centauri Hub, the galaxy felt unsettled in the bones, as if a long winter had been held at bay by a stubborn hearth. I returned to the Grand Council chamber with the human delegation and found the room smaller and louder than before. Ambassador Kelsa presented the report plainly. The projection above him showed burned holes and the captured cores bundled like trophies of a terrible harvest. Prime Councillor Norix's questions were precise and cold. Did you bring a power we cannot tame? Did you reintroduce a violence that will Ambassador Conor Omali did not minimize the danger. We were sanctioned for being dangerous, he said, and those sanctions were not always unjust. But today, the danger we became was the instrument that kept you from being erased. He spoke without flourish and without apology. Director Mara Quinn added for context, we did not breach your quarantine because we wanted to. We prepared so that if the galaxy needed us, we could respond. The council debate that followed ranged from clinical grievance to moral panic. Some delegates demanded strict oversight, new treaties, and contingents of inspectors. Others argued for swift inclusion, inviting humans to committees and joint labs. Anger threaded into the discussion, and not all anger was diplomatic. On several member worlds, protests flared, and in one there was violence against a convoy that had rescued refugees. Victories in battle had not erased the work of winning hearts. Still, the council had to act. A compromise formed. Humanity would receive provisional membership. Their quarantine marks would be lifted, and they would accept joint oversight on any military research for an initial period. It was not the unconditional acceptance the humans deserved or feared, but it was the most durable middle ground the Council could find. Votes were cast in sequences that felt both mechanical and intimate. When the final tally came, humanity had a seat, guarded by stipulations meant to guide, not to cage. When the decision was announced, the human delegation stood together and did something small and human. Ambassador Omali stepped forward and said, "We will not pretend to be saints. We will try to be useful." The line landed with a strange gravity. The practical work began the moment the Council approved the motion. Dr. Laila Asher and her team transferred the captured core to a joint research facility where Z and human biologists worked in tandem. We learned that the hollows were optimized for growth and brittle to certain kinds of contradiction. A handful of targeted perturbations could cascade into failure. Engineers on both sides rewrote defensive algorithms for vulnerable colonies and created new sensor protocols to detect early hollows signatures. Human forges, once civilian tools, were adapted into standardized repurposing rigs that Council logistics could deploy at threatened points. Perhaps more striking than the technical exchange was the cultural one. Delegates began to whisper about a curious human music that moved beings with no ear for melody to tears. Poets from different systems were invited to speak. Cooks traded preservation techniques. These small acts, sharing songs, recipes, lessons, functioned like diplomacy in the rough, and often did more to ease tensions than formal communiques. There were inevitable compromises. Humanity agreed to transparent audits of certain weapon programs and to participate in joint oversight councils. In return, the Council offered scholarships, access to shared archives, and a promise to lift barring restrictions that had isolated whole lines of research. The debate continued in quieter offices: how to balance curiosity with caution, how to harness a species' inventiveness without allowing it to spiral into predator and prey dynamics again. Ambassador Kelso, who had once argued to keep the quarantine in place, spoke to me privately and confessed that his estimate had been too narrow. "We feared the worst of them," he said, "and we forgot that dangerous can be magnificent if guided. We forgot to ask what courage looks like across species, that confession was part of a slower change." As practical programs rolled out, the hub became a place of labor and repair. New observatories rose, classrooms opened, and a joint observatory on a neutral moon began to catalog anomalies together. I spent idle hours in a clinic where its nurses hummed lullabies to alien children who had lost parents, and the songs worked in a language older than translation. Engineers stood elbow to elbow on workshop floors and swapped hacks. A simple bracket fix that saved a freighter in one system became a shared technique across 3 worlds. These small shared labors felt like stitching a torn garment. They were not grand, but they mattered. Memorials were erected for lost systems and small celebrations held for communities that had survived. The old warning beacons were turned off and studied as artifacts of fear rather than mere instruments. Many elders came to accept that isolation had saved nothing if it prevented help. Slowly, practice replaced paranoia. Children from exchange programs now played where diplomats once whispered. Their laughter became a fragile treaty. The Council had not granted humanity unconditional trust. It had, however, given the galaxy a way to practice trust in small increments. When I filed my own formal report, I added a line that was more observation than policy. The most dangerous species may be the ones willing to be useful. It was not a conclusion so much as an invitation. The shuttle to Earth felt small as the planet grew in the viewport, blue-green and stubborn. Ambassador Conor Omali made a wry comment about the old warning beacons. "We kept ourselves in and the galaxy out. It landed like a private history. I helped ready the first embassy, a modest building of glass, metal, and living gardens meant to feel neighborly rather than grand." Ambassador Kelso and I walked the halls before the reception and heard human radio, a storm song, someone counting shells, a recipe being read aloud. Those ordinary sounds threaded into the work of diplomacy and mattered as much as any treaty. When the Council lifted the quarantine, it did so with conditions: provisional membership, joint oversight on sensitive research, and a schedule for reassessment. The vote was not unanimous. Caution remained, but the decision was decisive. Ambassador Omali told the chamber, "We did what was needed. We will try to be useful." The statement was plain and carried weight. Practical work followed. Dr. Laila Asher's team shared analyses of the Hollow's core. and xenoscientists rewrote detection algorithms to catch early signatures. Human fabricators were adapted into standardized rigs the Council could deploy to threaten systems. Engineers exchanged small but vital fixes, a bracket design here, a software patch there that prevented losses in places the models had missed. Cultural exchange moved quickly. Artists performed for alien audiences, cooks traded preservation methods, and children attended mixed classrooms. I spent time in a small clinic where a nurse hummed a human lullaby to an alien child. The child slept, and the melody translated without words. These ordinary acts of care eased suspicion more effectively than some debates ever had. Still, concerns remained. Human impulsiveness and fierce independence worried several delegates. So oversight panels were created and transparency measures instituted. Ambassador Kelsa later told me that he had expected censure for his gamble. Instead, many thanked him privately for taking the risk that saved lives. I stayed at the embassy as staff, not for glory but because the slow work of repair felt urgent and true. On a clear afternoon beside a deactivated beacon, I listened to an old technician say, "We meant to keep the galaxy safe from us. We never imagined we'd ask it for help." He shrugged and added, "But here we are." At night I watched Earth's lights and imagined futures where we argued better, loved harder, and built together. Those possible tomorrows felt fragile and immense. They were worth the risk we had taken, and kept hoping that the choice humanity had made to meet danger and refuse passive calculation had saved more than systems. It had given the galaxy an awkward and vital truth. Danger can be a kind of responsibility, and bravery can look like deciding to be useful. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more human-first victories and impossible choices. Stay with us for more short epics, and share this one if it sparked something in you, where humanity echoes across the stars.